The date was March 2nd, 2019. Senator Adam Schiff sat in the green room at CBS Studios, checking his tie in the mirror one final time before his appearance on Face the Nation. His expression was calm, confident. This was routine now, his weekly ritual of going on national television to update the American people about the Russia investigation. He had done this hundreds of times. The makeup artist dabbed a final touch of powder on his forehead, and he nodded his thanks. In 7 minutes, he would be on air. In 7 minutes, he would say words that would come back to haunt him 6 years later in the most devastating way imaginable. He walked onto the set, shook hands with the host, settled into the chair with the ease of someone who had occupied this exact space in America's living rooms more times than he could count. The cameras were rolling. The red light blinked on, and then he said it. "I can tell you that the evidence of collusion and conspiracy is in plain sight." His voice was steady, authoritative, certain. The voice of a man who knew something you didn't. The voice of a federal prosecutor turned congressman who had access to classified briefings, secret testimony, intelligence you would never see. The voice of someone telling the absolute truth, except it wasn't the truth. And on a cold morning in February 2025, in a Senate hearing room packed with cameras and reporters, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana would make sure the whole world knew it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment this confrontation became inevitable, to the years of statements and claims, and carefully constructed narratives that would all come crashing down in a single afternoon. This is the story of how one senator built a reputation on certainty, and how another senator destroyed it by simply asking questions. This is the story of evidence that didn't exist, transcripts that were hidden, and a reckoning that was 6 years in the making. If you want to see how power really works in Washington, how reputations are built and destroyed, how truth eventually catches up to narrative no matter how long it takes, then stay with me. Because what happened in that hearing room wasn't just about two senators. It was about accountability. It was about what happens when someone finally asks the questions everyone else was too afraid to ask. Hit subscribe if you want more stories about the moments that change everything in American politics. Because this one changed everything for Adam Schiff. The story begins not in 2025 but in 2016 in the chaotic aftermath of an election that shocked the world. Donald Trump had won the presidency. The political establishment was reeling, and almost immediately a narrative began to form. Russia had interfered in the election. The Trump campaign had been involved. There was collusion, coordination, conspiracy. The evidence would come. It was only a matter of time. Adam Schiff was perfectly positioned to become the face of this narrative. In January 2017, he became the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. Not the chairman yet. The Democrats were still in the minority, but the ranking member, the senior Democrat, the voice of the opposition on one of the most powerful and secretive committees in Congress. The Intelligence Committee has access to information no one else sees. Classified briefings from the CIA, the FBI, the NSA. Raw intelligence, sensitive sources and methods. When a member of the Intelligence Committee tells you they've seen something, you believe them because you can't see it yourself. That's the power of that position. The power to know things other people can't verify. The power to speak with authority about secrets. And Adam Schiff used that power. Starting in early 2017, he became a fixture on cable news. CNN, MSNBC, the Sunday morning shows, the evening broadcasts. He was everywhere. And everywhere he went, his message was the same. There was evidence of collusion. He had seen it. It was serious. It was compelling. It was, as he would say again and again, in plain sight. March 19, 2017, meet the press. "I can't go into particulars, but there is more than circumstantial evidence now." The host pressed him. "What kind of evidence?" Schiff smiled that knowing smile. "I can't discuss the specifics, but I can tell you we've seen evidence that goes beyond mere circumstantial." April 2, 2017, State of the Union on CNN. "Is there evidence of collusion?" the host asked. Schiff didn't hesitate. "Yes, there is evidence that is not circumstantial and is very much worthy of investigation." May 29, 2017, on MSNBC. "There is now more than circumstantial evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians." Notice the pattern. Notice the careful language. He couldn't go into details. He couldn't discuss specifics. It was classified, it was sensitive, but trust him, the evidence was there. He had seen it with his own eyes, over and over and over again. Different shows, different hosts, different days, but always the same message. Always the same certainty. Always the same implication that if you could see what he had seen, you would understand. You would be just as convinced. You would know that the President of the United States had conspired with a foreign adversary to steal an election. Millions of Americans believed him. Why wouldn't they? Adam Schiff wasn't some partisan bomb thrower. He was a former federal prosecutor. He had a reputation for being serious, sober, careful. He was the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee. He had access to information they didn't have, and he was telling them with complete confidence that the evidence existed, that it was real, that it was damning. By the time the Democrats took control of the House in January 2019, and Adam Schiff became chairman of the Intelligence Committee, not just ranking member but chairman, he was one of the most recognizable political figures in America. He was a hero to the resistance, a truth teller, a patriot standing up to a corrupt president. He was on magazine covers. He wrote a book. He was mentioned as a possible attorney general in a future Democratic administration, maybe even a presidential candidate himself. And through it all, he kept saying the same thing. The evidence of collusion is in plain sight. March 2, 2019, Face the Nation. 6 weeks before the Mueller report would be released, Margaret Brennan asked him directly about the evidence. Schiff didn't blink. I can tell you that the evidence of collusion and conspiracy is in plain sight. In plain sight, not hidden in classified files, not buried in secret intelligence. In plain sight, visible to everyone. And then on April 18, 2019, Special Counsel Robert Mueller released his report. 448 pages. Volume 1 dealt with the question of coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia. Volume 2 dealt with obstruction of justice. But it was Volume 1 that mattered for Adam Schiff. Volume 1 that addressed the claims he had been making for 2 years. Volume 1 that would either vindicate him or destroy him. Page 2 of the Mueller report. The conclusion. The answer to the question that had consumed American politics for more than 2 years. The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. Did not establish. After nearly 2 years of investigation, after 40 FBI agents assigned to the case, after approximately 2,800 subpoenas, after 500 search warrants, after $32 million spent, after interviewing hundreds of witnesses, examining thousands of documents, pursuing every lead, did not establish conspiracy or coordination. The evidence Adam Schiff had claimed to see, the evidence he had told America was in plain sight, the evidence that was more than circumstantial. Robert Mueller couldn't find it. Now, to be fair, the Mueller report did document contacts between Trump campaign officials and Russians. It documented the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting. It documented Paul Manafort sharing polling data with Konstantin Kilimnik. It documented George Papadopoulos's communications about Russian outreach. It documented a lot of suspicious behavior. But suspicious behavior is not conspiracy. Contacts are not coordination. And the legal standard for conspiracy is specific. It requires an agreement to commit a crime. It requires coordination toward an illegal goal. And Mueller's team, with all their resources, with all their subpoena power, with all their access to classified intelligence, could not establish that such an agreement existed. So what did Adam Schiff do when the Mueller report came out and contradicted 2 years of his statements? Did he admit he was wrong? Did he say, I overestimated the strength of the evidence, I apologize to the American people? Did he show any humility at all? No. He doubled down. He went on television and insisted the Mueller report actually supported his position. He said there was plenty of evidence of collusion, even if it didn't rise to the level of criminal conspiracy. He said the evidence was damning, and the public needed to see it. He said Mueller had simply applied a narrow legal standard, but the facts were clear. In other words, he moved the goalposts. For 2 years, he had told America there was evidence of conspiracy and collusion. When the investigation found no such evidence, he simply redefined what collusion meant. He changed the standard. He insisted he had been right all along. The investigation had just used the wrong framework. It was a masterclass in political spin, and much of the media let him get away with it. But not everyone forgot what Adam Schiff had said. Not everyone forgot the confidence, the certainty, the repeated claims of evidence that turned out not to exist. Some people were keeping track, taking notes, collecting transcripts, waiting for the right moment to ask questions. One of those people was a senator from Louisiana named John Kennedy. Now, if you don't know John Kennedy, you need to understand something about him. He cultivates a very specific image. The Southern gentleman, the country lawyer, the folksy drawl, the reading glasses perched on his nose, the homespun metaphors. He talks slowly. He smiles often. He seems almost gentle, almost harmless. It's an act. Well, not entirely an act. He really is from Louisiana. He really does have that accent. But the folksy persona masks one of the sharpest legal minds in the Senate. John Kennedy has degrees from Vanderbilt, the University of Virginia, and Oxford. He was a lawyer for decades before entering politics. He knows how to question a witness. He knows how to build a case. He knows how to take someone's own words and turn them into a trap. And he had been watching Adam Schiff for years. Kennedy had watched Schiff go on television over and over claiming to have evidence. He had watched the Mueller report come out and contradict those claims. He had watched Schiff refuse to admit error. And Kennedy had watched something else, something that made him even more curious, even more determined. In May 2020, more than a year after the Mueller report was released, the transcripts of the closed-door witness interviews conducted by Schiff's Intelligence Committee were finally declassified and released to the public. These were the interviews that had been conducted in 2017 and 2018 during the height of the Russia investigation. 53 witnesses had testified under oath behind closed doors before Schiff's committee. And when those transcripts came out, they revealed something extraordinary. The witnesses had testified that they had no evidence of collusion. Not some of them, not most of them, all of them. Every single witness who was asked directly about evidence of conspiracy or coordination said they had not seen it. James Clapper, the former director of National Intelligence, under oath, behind closed doors, asked if he had evidence of collusion. I never saw any direct empirical evidence that the Trump campaign or someone in it was plotting or conspiring with the Russians to meddle with the election. John Brennan, the former director of the CIA, under oath, behind closed doors, asked what evidence he had. I don't know if I received information about any collusion between Trump and the Russians. Samantha Power, former UN ambassador. Susan Rice, former National Security Advisor. Ben Rhodes, former Deputy National Security Advisor. Loretta Lynch, former Attorney General. Sally Yates, former Deputy Attorney General. Michael Morrell, former Acting CIA Director. All of them testified behind closed doors before Adam Schiff's committee. All of them were asked about evidence. And all of them said they had no direct evidence of collusion. Now here's the thing that made this so damning. These interviews were conducted in 2017 and 2018, before the Mueller report, before the conclusion of the investigation. At the exact same time, Adam Schiff was going on television telling America he had seen evidence of collusion. His own witnesses were telling his committee under oath that they had no such evidence. And Adam Schiff kept those transcripts secret. As chairman of the Intelligence Committee, he had the power to seek declassification. He had the power to release them to the public. He chose not to. In fact, when acting director of National Intelligence Richard Grenell moved to declassify the transcripts in May 2020, Schiff fought it. He wrote letters objecting. He claimed the transcripts contained sensitive information. He said releasing them would be dangerous. But when they finally came out, there was nothing particularly sensitive in them. What they contained was testimony that contradicted everything Adam Schiff had been telling the American public. They contained witnesses saying under oath that they had no evidence, while Schiff was on television saying the evidence was overwhelming. That's what Adam Schiff wanted to keep secret. Not sources, not methods. The fact that his own investigation hadn't found what he kept claiming existed. John Kennedy read every one of those transcripts, all 53 of them, thousands of pages, and he started building a file. Transcripts of Schiff's television appearances alongside transcripts of the witness testimony. 47 times. Kennedy counted them. 47 separate occasions where Adam Schiff went on television and claimed to have evidence of collusion, and Kennedy cross-referenced them with what the witnesses were saying behind closed doors at the same time. The contrast was stark. The contradiction was undeniable, and Kennedy decided that someday, somehow, he was going to ask Adam Schiff about it. The opportunity came in February 2025. Adam Schiff had been elected to the Senate in November 2024. He won California's open seat in a landslide. After 14 years in the House, he was moving to the upper chamber. It was supposed to be the capstone of his career, the reward for his service, the platform for even higher ambitions. The Senate Intelligence Committee scheduled a hearing on maintaining public trust in intelligence oversight. It was a broad topic, the kind of hearing that happens regularly without much fanfare, and the Democratic chairman, Mark Warner of Virginia, invited Adam Schiff to testify as an expert witness. After all, Schiff had chaired the House Intelligence Committee. He had experience with oversight. He had thoughts about how to maintain public trust. It seemed like a perfect fit. Warner expected Schiff to deliver prepared remarks about the importance of congressional oversight, the threats from foreign adversaries, the challenges of balancing transparency with classification. He expected a friendly hearing where Schiff could burnish his credentials and remind everyone of his expertise. What Warner didn't expect was John Kennedy. Kennedy hadn't said much about the hearing in advance. He hadn't given any indication he was planning anything unusual. He just requested his full 10 minutes of questioning time and showed up that morning with an unusually large stack of folders. The hearing began normally enough. Chairman Warner gave his opening statement. Vice Chairman Rubio gave his. Then it was Schiff's turn, and true to form, he delivered exactly the kind of statement everyone expected: polished, prosecutorial, self-righteous. He talked about his years as Intelligence Committee chairman. He talked about the unprecedented challenges the country had faced. He talked about foreign interference and domestic subversion and the importance of standing up to those who would undermine democracy. He talked about the attacks he had endured, the death threats, the censure by the House Republicans, and he made it clear he wore that censure as a badge of honor. He talked about truth-tellers and cover-ups. He talked about being over the target. He talked about colleagues who had chosen to look away from the evidence. And he concluded by saying the work was not done, the threats had not gone away, and neither had he. It was vintage Adam Schiff, righteous, defiant, certain of his own righteousness. The Democratic senators nodded approvingly. The media in the gallery scribbled notes. This was going to be a good hearing for Schiff. And then it was John Kennedy's turn to ask questions. Kennedy activated his microphone. He looked up from his folders for the first time all morning. When he spoke, his Louisiana accent was warm and friendly. "Senator Schiff, congratulations on your election to the Senate. Welcome to this side of the Capitol. I know you've been wanting to join us for a while." Schiff nodded cautiously, unsure where this was going. "Thank you, Senator." Kennedy smiled that gentle smile. "Now you just gave us quite a history lesson. Russia, election interference, threats to democracy, and I appreciate that. You were chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. You saw things most of us didn't see. Classified briefings, intelligence reports, the real stuff." He paused, picking up one of his folders. "So I want to ask you about something you said. Actually, something you said many times between 2017 and 2019. Kennedy opened the folder. "You made a lot of television appearances during those years. CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, NBC. Sunday shows, cable news, morning programs. You were everywhere." Schiff straightened slightly in his chair. "I believed it was important to keep the public informed." "I'm sure you did," Kennedy said agreeably. He pulled out a thick stack of papers. "And in those appearances, you made some very specific claims, very confident claims about evidence you said you had personally seen." Kennedy adjusted his reading glasses. "I've got transcripts here of 47 separate television appearances where you claim to have direct evidence, or more than circumstantial evidence, of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. 47 times, Senator." He began reading from the transcripts. "March 19, 2017, meet the press. You said, 'I can't go into particulars, but there is more than circumstantial evidence now.'" He looked up briefly, then continued. December 3, 2017, CNN State of the Union. You said, "The Russians offered help, the campaign accepted help, the Russians gave help, and the president made full use of that help." Kennedy kept reading. February 14, 2018, PBS NewsHour. You said there is ample evidence of collusion in plain sight. One more. March 2, 2019, CBS Face the Nation. You said, "I can tell you that the evidence of collusion and conspiracy is in plain sight." Kennedy looked up at Schiff. The folksy warmth was still in his voice, but something had shifted. "Senator, did you make those statements?" Schiff's expression had changed. The easy confidence was gone. His jaw was tight. "I stand by my assessment that there was significant evidence of collusion." "I didn't ask about your assessment," Kennedy said gently. "I asked if you made those statements. You said you saw evidence. You said it was more than circumstantial. You said it was in plain sight. Did you say those things?" "Yes, but the context." "Thank you," Kennedy interrupted. He made a note on his legal pad. "So between 2017 and 2019, you repeatedly told the American public, on national television as chairman of the Intelligence Committee, that you had seen direct evidence of conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. You said it was in plain sight. You said it was more than circumstantial. Is that an accurate summary of your public statements?" Schiff leaned into his microphone. "I believed then and I believe now that the evidence supported those characterizations." Kennedy stopped him. "Senator, I'm not asking what you believed. I'm asking what you said. Did you tell the American people you had seen evidence of collusion? Yes or no?" Pause. The hearing room was silent. "Yes," Kennedy nodded slowly. "Good. I just wanted to establish what you told the American people." He picked up another folder, this one thicker than the first. "Now let's talk about what that evidence actually showed." Kennedy opened the folder and pulled out a bound document. Senator Schiff, on April 18, 2019, Special Counsel Robert Mueller released his report, 448 pages, the result of nearly 2 years of investigation. 40 FBI agents assigned to the case, approximately 2,800 subpoenas issued, 500 search warrants executed, $32 million in taxpayer money spent. He held up the document. "This is Volume 1, which addresses the question of conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. I want to read you what Mr. Mueller concluded." Kennedy found the page. Page 2, and I quote, "The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities." End quote. He looked up at Schiff. "Did not establish." After 2 years, 40 FBI agents, $32 million, and 500 search warrants, the special counsel did not establish conspiracy or coordination. Kennedy set down the report. "Senator, you told the American people the evidence was in plain sight. You said you had seen it with your own eyes. You said it was more than circumstantial. And then Robert Mueller, with all the resources of the federal government, spent 2 years looking for that evidence and didn't find it." Schiff tried to respond. "The Mueller report documented extensive contacts." "I'm not asking about contacts," Kennedy said. "I'm asking about conspiracy, collusion. The thing you said was in plain sight." His voice remained friendly, but there was steel underneath. "The Mueller report says it wasn't there. Were you wrong, or was Robert Mueller wrong?" Schiff shifted in his seat. "The report documented numerous links between the campaign and Russia." Kennedy waved his hand dismissively. "Senator, I've got links to my garbage man. I see him every Tuesday. That doesn't mean I'm conspiring with him." A few people in the gallery chuckled. Kennedy didn't smile. "You didn't tell the American people there were links. You told them there was collusion. You told them there was conspiracy. You told them you had seen the evidence. And Robert Mueller said it wasn't there." He pulled out another document. "But here's what's really interesting, Senator. In 2020, after much legal wrangling, the transcripts of closed-door testimony before your committee were finally released. 53 witnesses under oath, behind closed doors." Kennedy opened the new folder. "And those transcripts showed something remarkable. The same officials who testified before your committee under oath in private said they had no direct evidence of collusion, but in public they implied the opposite." He started reading from the transcripts. James Clapper, former Director of National Intelligence. In his closed-door testimony, he said, I never saw any direct empirical evidence that the Trump campaign or someone in it was plotting or conspiring with the Russians to meddle with the election. That's what he said under oath, behind closed doors. But in public, Director Clapper went on television repeatedly suggesting there was evidence. He called the president's behavior treasonous. He implied he had seen things he couldn't discuss. Kennedy pulled out another transcript. John Brennan, former director of the CIA, in his closed-door testimony, he said, "I don't know if I received information about any collusion between Trump and the Russians." He said he didn't know under oath. But in public, Director Brennan accused the president of treason. He said Trump was wholly in the pocket of Putin. He went on television hundreds of times implying he had evidence. Kennedy spread multiple transcripts across his desk. Susan Rice, Samantha Power, Ben Rhodes, Loretta Lynch. The same pattern over and over. Behind closed doors under oath, they said they had no direct evidence. In public, they implied the opposite. He looked directly at Schiff. "Senator, you had these transcripts. You conducted these interviews. You heard these witnesses say under oath that they had no direct evidence of collusion. And then you went on television 47 times that I've counted and told the American people you had seen evidence. Why didn't you release those transcripts?" Schiff's face had gone tight. The transcripts contained classified information. "They contained testimony that contradicted your public statements," Kennedy shot back. "That's what they contained." His folksy tone had vanished entirely now. "You fought to keep them classified for over a year. Director of National Intelligence Grenell finally declassified them in May 2020. You didn't want them released. Why? The classification process requires." "Senator, you were the chairman," Kennedy interrupted. "You could have worked to declassify those transcripts. You could have told the American people what your own witnesses said under oath. Instead, you kept them secret while going on television claiming you had seen evidence that those same witnesses said didn't exist." Kennedy gathered the transcripts into a neat pile. "That's not oversight, Senator. That's not protecting democracy. That's propaganda. You used your position as Intelligence Committee chairman to spread a narrative you knew wasn't supported by the evidence." He leaned forward. "And you want to talk about threats to democracy? How about a senior official using classified information, or the pretense of classified information, to manipulate public opinion? How about telling the American people you've seen evidence that doesn't exist?" Kennedy's voice dropped lower. "That's a threat to democracy, Senator, and you're the one who did it." Chairman Warner shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Senator Kennedy, I'd remind you to direct your questions." "Mr. Chairman, I'm asking questions," Kennedy replied. "I'm asking Senator Schiff to explain the discrepancy between what his witnesses said under oath and what he told the American public. That seems like a relevant question for a hearing about public trust." Warner had no response. Kennedy wasn't finished. He picked up yet another folder. "Senator Schiff, let's talk about the FISA applications." In early 2018, Congressman Devin Nunes released a memo alleging that the FBI had abused the FISA process to surveil Carter Page, a Trump campaign advisor. "Do you remember that?" Schiff's posture stiffened. "I remember a misleading partisan document that endangered sources and methods." "You wrote a counter memo, didn't you?" Kennedy asked. "The Schiff memo. And in that memo, you said the Nunes memo was deliberately misleading. You said the FBI and Department of Justice had acted appropriately in seeking the FISA warrant. You said there was no abuse." Schiff nodded cautiously. "That was my assessment based on reviewing the underlying documents." Kennedy pulled out Schiff's memo, the declassified version released in February 2018. "Let me read from your memo. You wrote, and I quote, FBI and DOJ officials did not abuse the FISA process, omit material information, or subvert this vital tool to spy on the Trump campaign." He continued reading. "You wrote, the FBI made only narrow use of the Steele dossier. You wrote, the FBI provided additional information obtained through multiple independent sources that corroborated Steele's reporting." Kennedy looked up. "Senator, do you stand by those statements today?" Schiff hesitated. "The context of my memo, do you stand by those statements? Yes or no?" "I stand by the overall conclusion that." "That's not what I asked." Kennedy picked up another document, much thicker than Schiff's memo. "This is the report of the Department of Justice Inspector General, released in December 2019. Inspector General Michael Horowitz spent over a year investigating the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation. He examined those exact FISA applications you said were proper. Kennedy opened the report, and he found, let me count them here, 17 significant errors or omissions. 17. He began reading. The FBI failed to inform the FISA court that Christopher Steele's primary subsource disputed Steele's characterization of their conversations. The FBI knew the subsource had contradicted Steele, and they didn't tell the court. The FBI failed to disclose that Carter Page had been an approved operational contact for another U.S. government agency, that he had actually helped the CIA, not worked against American interests. The FBI misled the court about the reliability of the Steele dossier. They said Steele's reporting had been corroborated when in fact key claims had been contradicted. The FBI omitted exculpatory information about George Papadopoulos that undercut the premise of the investigation. The FBI continued to seek FISA renewals even after evidence emerged that undermined their original claims. Kennedy looked up. 17 errors, Senator, all in one direction, all making the case for surveillance look stronger than it was. Does that sound like the FBI acted appropriately? Schiff's jaw tightened. The Inspector General also found that the investigation was properly predicated. I didn't ask about predication, Kennedy said sharply. I asked about your memo. Your memo said the FBI made only narrow use of the Steele dossier. The Inspector General found it was central and essential to the FISA applications. Your memo said the FBI provided corroborating evidence. The Inspector General found they omitted exculpatory evidence. Your memo said there was no abuse. The Inspector General found 17 significant errors that you somehow missed, even though you had access to the same underlying documents. Kennedy spread the two documents side by side on his desk. So either you didn't read the documents carefully or you read them and decided to mislead the public anyway. Which is it? Schiff leaned into his microphone. The Inspector General's findings, while concerning, do not change the fundamental. Senator, yes or no? Was your memo accurate? My memo accurately reflected. Was it accurate? 17 errors. You said no abuse. Were you right or wrong? Silence filled the hearing room. Everyone was watching Adam Schiff. His face was pale. His jaw was set. He said nothing. I'll take that as an admission that you were wrong, Kennedy said. He made a note. And yet you've never corrected the record. You've never said my memo was inaccurate. You've never apologized for telling the American people the FBI acted properly when the Inspector General found 17 significant errors. He set down his pen. That's the pattern, isn't it, Senator? You make confident claims, you're proven wrong, and you never ever admit it. Kennedy consulted his notes and pulled out a new folder. Let's talk about impeachment. September 2019. You chaired the first public hearing about President Trump's phone call with President Zelensky of Ukraine. And in your opening statement, you read what you said was a summary of that call. Schiff's expression became guarded. I characterized the essence of the conversation. Let me read what you said, Kennedy replied. He pulled out the transcript of that hearing. You put these words in President Trump's mouth. You said, and I quote, I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent. Understand? Lots of it on this and on that. Kennedy looked up. Senator, did President Trump actually say those words on the call? Schiff shifted in his seat. I made clear it was a parody. You made clear. Kennedy found another passage. Let me read your exact introduction. You said, it reads like a classic organized crime shakedown, shorn of its rambling character. And in not so many words, this is the essence of what the president communicates. He set down the transcript. You said, this is the essence of what the president communicates. And then you made up words he never said, in an official congressional hearing, while you were chairman, on national television. Kennedy shook his head slowly. Senator, I was a lawyer for a long time. If I had stood up in court and read fake quotes to a jury, words that a witness never actually said and claimed it was the essence of what they meant, I would have been sanctioned. I might have been disbarred, but you did it in Congress. You read fabricated quotes into the official record, and when people objected, you called it a parody. Schiff's voice rose slightly. The American people understood what I was doing, did they? Kennedy asked. You were the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. You were conducting an impeachment inquiry. You sat there in your official capacity and made up quotes. How were the American people supposed to know you were joking? Kennedy pulled out another document. Let's talk about the whistleblower. In September 2019, when the whistleblower complaint became public, you were asked whether your committee had had any contact with the whistleblower before the complaint was filed. Do you remember what you said? Schiff was silent. Kennedy read from the transcript. September 17, 2019. You appeared on MSNBC. The host asked, "Have you heard from the whistleblower? Do you want to hear from the whistleblower?" And you said, "We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower. We would like to," end quote. He looked up. Was that statement true? Schiff chose his words carefully. My statement was accurate in its context. Your committee staff had met with the whistleblower before the complaint was filed, Kennedy said flatly. Your staff had discussed the substance of the allegations. Your staff had helped guide the whistleblower on the proper procedures for filing. You knew about the complaint before it was official, and you said, "We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower." Kennedy leaned forward. That was a lie by omission at best, Senator. You knew your committee had contact with the whistleblower. You knew your staff had been involved, and you chose to hide that. My staff's contact was appropriate under. I didn't ask if it was appropriate, Kennedy interrupted. I asked why you hid it. Why didn't you say, "My staff has had contact with the whistleblower"? Why did you leave the impression that you knew nothing about the complaint until it was filed? Schiff said nothing. I'll tell you why, Kennedy continued. Because if the American people knew that your committee had helped shape the complaint, it would have looked like a setup. It would have looked coordinated. It would have undermined the narrative you were trying to create. So you hid it. You told a misleading statement on national television. And when you got caught, you said your statement was technically accurate. Kennedy gathered his documents. Senator, do you see a pattern here? Because I do. When you wanted to push the Russia collusion narrative, you went on TV and claimed to have evidence you didn't have. 47 times. When you wanted to discredit the nun's memo, you wrote a counter memo that turned out to be wrong on almost every significant point. When you wanted to conduct impeachment, you read fake quotes in an official hearing and called it parody. When you wanted to protect the whistleblower process, you misled the public about your committee's contacts. Kennedy's voice hardened. The pattern is this. Adam Schiff says whatever is necessary to achieve his political goals, regardless of whether it's true. And then when he's caught, he claims he was misunderstood or taken out of context or engaging in parody. He looked directly at Schiff. And you want to lecture us about threats to democracy? Kennedy checked the clock. He had a few minutes left. He turned to a new folder. Senator Schiff, on June 21, 2023, the House of Representatives voted to censure you. The vote was 213 to 209. Do you recall that vote? Schiff's expression flickered with anger. I recall a partisan exercise. The resolution stated, and let me read this exactly, that you misled the American public about the Russia investigation, that you made false statements about evidence of collusion, that you spread false accusations that were unsupported by evidence. Kennedy held up the censure resolution. Your own colleagues, members of the United States House of Representatives, voted to officially condemn you for misleading the American people. This wasn't a newspaper editorial. This wasn't a cable news pundit. This was an official action of Congress. That vote was purely partisan, Schiff said. Senator, you spent 4 years accusing the President of the United States of being a Russian asset, of conspiring with a foreign adversary, of betraying his country. You made those accusations on television, in hearings, in official statements. 47 times that I've documented, probably many more. And when the evidence proved you wrong, when the Mueller report came out, when the transcripts were released, when the Inspector General issued his findings, you didn't apologize. You didn't admit you were wrong. You just kept saying you were right and everyone else was wrong. Kennedy set down the resolution. The censure wasn't partisan, Senator. It was accountability, something you're apparently not familiar with. He pulled out more documents. Now let's talk about how your party responded to that censure. Speaker Emerita Pelosi called the vote an abuse of process. That's true. But do you know what she didn't say? Kennedy looked at his notes. She didn't say you were telling the truth. She didn't defend your claims about evidence. She didn't say Adam Schiff was right about Russian collusion. She defended you against the process. She didn't defend your statements. In fact, Senator, I've done some research. I couldn't find a single Democratic leader who said, after the Mueller report, after the transcripts, after the Inspector General report, who said, Adam Schiff was right about collusion. Not one. Kennedy paused. Why do you think that is, Senator? Why won't your own party say you were right? Schiff's voice was tight. My colleagues understand the work I did to protect. Your colleagues know what the Mueller report said, Kennedy interrupted. They know what the Inspector General found, they know what the transcripts showed, and none of them will say you were right because you weren't. Kennedy picked up the censure resolution again. The resolution also imposed a fine, $16 million if I recall correctly. Did you pay that fine, Senator? I did not. The fine was unconstitutional. So you were censured by the House of Representatives for misleading the American public. You were fined, and you refused to pay. Kennedy shook his head. Just like you refused to admit you were wrong. Just like you refused to apologize for spreading claims that weren't supported by evidence. Just like you refused to release the transcripts that contradicted your public statements. He leaned forward. Is there anything you accept responsibility for, Senator? Anything at all? In your entire career, have you ever said, I was wrong and I'm sorry? Schiff was silent for a long moment. I have always acted in what I believe to be the best interests of the country. That's not what I asked, Kennedy said. Have you ever admitted you were wrong about anything? Silence. I didn't think so. Kennedy opened his final major folder. Senator, during your time as Intelligence Committee Chairman, there were numerous leaks of classified information to the media. Stories that appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN. Stories that cited sources familiar with the intelligence or congressional sources. He pulled out a stack of news articles, and a remarkable number of those leaks seemed to support exactly the narrative you were pushing publicly. Stories about Trump transition contacts with Russians, stories about FISA surveillance, stories about Intelligence Committee findings before they were officially released. Kennedy spread the articles across his desk. Senator, did you ever leak classified information to the media? Schiff's response was measured. I have never disclosed classified information inappropriately. That's a lawyer's answer, Kennedy said. I asked if you leaked information, not whether it was appropriate, not whether it was classified. Did you provide information to reporters that came from your committee's work? I engaged with the press as part of my oversight responsibilities. Did you leak? I reject the characterization. Kennedy held up his hand. Let me give you a specific example. December 2017, while your committee was conducting closed-door interviews, someone leaked information to CNN about an email that Donald Trump Jr. had received. He pulled out the CNN article. CNN reported as a bombshell that Trump Jr. had received an email on September 4, 2016, with a decryption key to access WikiLeaks documents. The story claimed this proved the Trump campaign had advanced access to stolen documents before they were public. Kennedy looked up. The story was everywhere, smoking gun, proof of coordination. CNN went wall to wall with it. He set down the article. And it was wrong. The email was dated September 14th, not September 4th. The documents were already public by then. There was no advanced access. There was no smoking gun. CNN had to issue a major correction. Kennedy's voice sharpened. But here's my question, Senator. Who leaked that information to CNN in the first place? Who told them about that email but got the date wrong? Because only people with access to the committee's evidence would have known about that email. Someone with access gave CNN information that was wrong, but wrong in a way that supported the collusion narrative. Someone who was more interested in pushing a story than in getting the facts right. He looked directly at Schiff. Any idea who that might have been? Schiff's face was stone. I have no knowledge of how CNN obtained that information. That's not what I asked, Kennedy said. I asked if you have any idea who might have leaked it. You were the ranking member on the committee. You had access to that evidence. You were going on television every day pushing the collusion narrative. And suddenly CNN has a bombshell story that supports your narrative but gets the facts wrong. Kennedy gathered the articles. The pattern of leaks from your committee was remarkable, Senator. Almost every major story that advanced the collusion narrative seemed to come from congressional sources or sources familiar with the intelligence. and you were the most visible person pushing that narrative. I'm not accusing you of anything specific, Kennedy said. I don't have proof, but I'll tell you what it looks like from Louisiana. It looks like someone was using selective leaks to manipulate public opinion. It looks like someone was giving reporters information that made the president look guilty, even when the full picture was more complicated. He set down the folder. And the American people deserve to know if their Intelligence Committee chairman was playing games with classified information for political advantage. Kennedy set aside all his folders and removed his reading glasses. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, more serious. Senator Schiff, you came here today to talk about maintaining public trust in intelligence oversight. That's the title of this hearing. So let's talk about trust. He paused, gathering his thoughts. For 4 years, you told the American people that the President of the United States was a Russian asset. You said he had conspired with a foreign adversary to steal an election. You said you had seen the evidence with your own eyes. You said it was in plain sight. Millions of Americans believed you. And why wouldn't they? You were the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. You had access to classified information that ordinary citizens couldn't see. You spoke with absolute certainty. Kennedy's voice grew heavier. And it wasn't true. The Mueller report found no conspiracy. The transcripts showed your witnesses had no direct evidence. The Inspector General found the FBI misled the FISA court 17 times. Everything you told the American people, everything you were so certain about, was wrong. He leaned forward. But here's what really damages trust, Senator. You never admitted you were wrong. When the Mueller report came out, you didn't say, "I made a mistake." You said the report actually supported your position. When the transcripts were released, you didn't apologize for hiding them. You attacked the people who declassified them. When the Inspector General found 17 errors, you didn't correct your memo. You just moved on. That's not a mistake, Kennedy said. A mistake is when you get something wrong and you acknowledge it. What you did was deliberate. You knew what the transcripts said. You knew what your witnesses testified under oath, and you kept saying the opposite. Kennedy stood up from his seat and walked to the front of the dais. You want to know what threatens democracy, Senator? I'll tell you. It's when officials with access to classified information use that access to manipulate public opinion. It's when a committee chairman tells the American people he's seen evidence that doesn't exist. It's when someone reads fake quotes in a congressional hearing and calls it parody. It's when someone lies about contacts with whistleblowers. It's when someone writes memos claiming the FBI acted properly, knowing the Inspector General would later find 17 significant errors. It's when someone fights to keep transcripts classified because they contradict his public statements. Kennedy's voice rose. That's what threatens democracy, Senator, not foreign adversaries, not disinformation from overseas. Officials right here in America, with security clearances and committee chairmanships, using their positions to mislead the public. And that's exactly what you did. He walked back to his seat and gathered his materials. You've spent years claiming you were protecting democracy from Donald Trump, that you were the truth teller, that you were the one standing up to tyranny while everyone else cowered. But history is going to show something different. History is going to show that you did more damage to public trust than almost anyone, because you taught millions of Americans that they can't trust what their leaders tell them. That committee chairman lie. That evidence doesn't matter if the narrative is right. That certainty is more important than accuracy. Kennedy picked up the stack of transcripts, the 47 television appearances. Some people did something to America's faith in its institutions, Senator, and those people include you. The American people trusted you. You had access to information they couldn't see, and you abused that trust. You lied to them over and over for political advantage. He set down the transcripts. And the worst part, you're not ashamed. You're proud of it. You came here today to lecture us about threats to democracy, while embodying those very threats. You still think you were the hero. Kennedy looked at Schiff one final time. That tells me everything I need to know about your judgment and your character. He gathered his folders and turned to Chairman Warner. I yield back. The room was frozen. For a long moment, no one moved. The cameras kept rolling, but even the photographers had stopped clicking. The senators sat in stunned silence. The gallery was completely still. Then the dam broke. Reporters shouted questions. Photographers rushed forward. Democratic senators huddled together in urgent whispered conversation. Republican senators sat back, some looking satisfied, others looking almost uncomfortable with what they'd just witnessed. At the witness table, Adam Schiff sat motionless. His carefully constructed demeanor had cracked. His face was pale, his jaw tight. The righteous certainty that had carried him through 1,000 interviews, 1,000 hearings, 1,000 attacks, it was gone. His communications director was at his elbow, whispering urgently. His chief of staff was on the phone, already in damage control mode, but Schiff wasn't listening. He was staring at the stack of transcripts Kennedy had left on his desk, 47 television appearances, his own words used against him. Chairman Warner banged his gavel, trying to restore order. "This hearing is in recess. This hearing is in recess." Schiff stood slowly, mechanically. He gathered his papers, though nothing in them could help him now. His staff formed a protective circle around him as he moved toward the exit. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. "Senator Schiff, do you have a response? Senator Schiff, were you lying about the evidence? Senator Schiff, will you apologize?" He said nothing. He kept walking, eyes forward, face expressionless. As he passed Kennedy's seat, the Louisiana senator was calmly organizing his folders, chatting with an aide about something mundane. Lunch plans maybe, or a vote scheduled for the afternoon. Kennedy glanced up as Schiff passed. "Senator Schiff." Schiff stopped. Their eyes met. Kennedy's expression was almost kind. "I meant what I said. It wasn't personal. It was about the truth. And the truth is, you had every opportunity to admit you were wrong, to say, 'I got it wrong and I'm sorry.' You never took it." He shrugged slightly. "That's on you, Senator, not me." Schiff said nothing. He walked out of the hearing room without looking back. The C-SPAN video of the hearing went viral within hours. 45 million views in the first 24 hours. Clips spread across every platform. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. "Kennedy destroys Schiff" became a trending topic. Political commentators dissected every exchange. Late-night hosts, for once, covered a Senate hearing. The mainstream media tried to frame it as a Republican attack. GOP senator launches partisan assault on Schiff's Russia record. Kennedy rehashes debunked accusations. But the framing couldn't contain the reality. The clips were too damaging. Kennedy had used Schiff's own words, his own documents, his own testimony. People could watch for themselves and make up their own minds. The Democratic response was muted, almost embarrassed. Chuck Schumer released a statement calling the hearing a distraction from the real issues facing Americans. He didn't defend Schiff's claims. Nancy Pelosi, reached for comment, said only that Adam has always acted in good faith. She didn't say he was right. The 2028 speculation that had surrounded Schiff evaporated overnight. Donors who had been quietly lining up went quiet. Operatives who had been taking his calls stopped returning them. The presidential ambitions he had harbored for years, the reason he had sought the Senate seat in the first place, were finished. Within weeks, Schiff's role in the Senate had diminished dramatically. Committee assignments that had seemed certain fell through. Co-sponsors for his legislation became hard to find. Colleagues who had once sought his counsel began avoiding him in the hallways. The political obituaries began appearing. The rise and fall of Adam Schiff. How one hearing ended a political career. The man who cried collusion. Some were sympathetic, portraying him as a true believer who had gotten carried away. Others were harsher, depicting him as a calculating politician who had knowingly misled the public for political gain. All of them agreed on one thing: Kennedy had ended him. 3 months after the hearing, a reporter from The Atlantic tracked down Kennedy in his office. "Senator, do you have any regrets about how you questioned Senator Schiff?" Kennedy was reviewing papers at his desk. He looked up and smiled. "Regrets, ma'am. I read his own words back to him. I showed him his own documents. I asked him questions about his own statements. If that was unfair, then I don't know what fair is." "Some have said you were too harsh," the reporter pressed, "that you were settling political scores rather than seeking truth." Kennedy set down his pen. "Let me ask you something. For 4 years, Adam Schiff went on television and told the American people their president was a Russian spy. He said he had seen the evidence. He said it was in plain sight. Millions of people believed him because he was the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and it wasn't true." He leaned back in his chair. Now when that happens, when a senior official misleads the public on something that important, someone needs to ask questions. Someone needs to say, wait a minute. You told us X, but the evidence shows Y. Explain that. That's not settling scores. That's accountability. Do you think he was deliberately lying, or did he genuinely believe what he was saying? The reporter asked. Kennedy considered the question. You know, I've thought about that a lot, and honestly, I don't know. Maybe he convinced himself he was right. Maybe he saw what he wanted to see. Maybe he got so invested in the narrative that he couldn't let go of it, even when the evidence went the other way. He shrugged. But at some point, the difference between lying and self-deception stops mattering. The effect is the same. Millions of people were misled. Trust in institutions was damaged. The country was divided even further, and he never apologized, never admitted he was wrong. That's what gets me, Kennedy continued. If he had said at any point, I got it wrong and I'm sorry, I think people would have forgiven him. Americans are generous that way. We understand that people make mistakes. Kennedy shook his head. But he couldn't do it. He couldn't admit he was wrong. Even after the Mueller report, even after the transcripts, even after the inspector general, he kept insisting he was right. And that's not a mistake anymore. That's arrogance. That's pride. That's putting your ego above the truth. The reporter asked one final question. What do you think your legacy from that hearing will be? Kennedy thought for a moment. I hope the legacy is simple, that truth matters, that even powerful people have to answer for what they say, that you can't just go on television and make claims without evidence and expect no one to ever call you on it. He smiled. Adam Schiff spent 4 years telling Americans he had seen evidence that didn't exist, and for 4 years nobody really challenged him on it. The media repeated his claims. His colleagues defended him. He became a hero to half the country. All I did was ask questions. I took his own words, his own documents, and I asked him to explain. That's it. That's all. Kennedy stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Capitol dome. The truth is pretty simple once you lay it out. He said he saw evidence. The evidence wasn't there. He should have admitted it. He didn't. He turned back to the reporter. Some people did something to America's trust in its institutions. Some people went on television and misled the public about matters of enormous importance. Some people never admitted they were wrong. Kennedy smiled that folksy smile. I just asked questions. The truth did the rest. Adam Schiff served out his Senate term in relative obscurity. He gave few interviews. He avoided the Sunday shows that had once been his second home. His legislation went nowhere. His colleagues were polite but distant. The presidential campaign he had dreamed of never materialized. When 2028 came around, his name wasn't even mentioned in the speculation. The door that had once seemed so open had closed permanently. Occasionally, interviewers would ask him about the Kennedy hearing. His answers were always the same. The questions were partisan. The framing was unfair. His record spoke for itself. But his record did speak for itself. That was precisely the problem. Years later, historians would assess the Russia collusion narrative and Schiff's role in promoting it. The consensus was harsh. He had made confident claims that weren't supported by the evidence. He had hidden transcripts that contradicted his public statements. He had never acknowledged his errors. Whether he had believed his own claims or had knowingly misled the public remained debated. But the effect was the same either way. Millions of Americans had been told something that wasn't true, and the man who had told them had never apologized. The Kennedy hearing became a case study in accountability. How one afternoon of tough questions could expose years of misleading statements. Political science classes studied the transcript. Journalism schools used it as an example of how to, and how not to, cover powerful sources. And John Kennedy, he returned to his work in the Senate. He continued asking uncomfortable questions of witnesses who expected deference. He continued speaking in that folksy Louisiana drawl that made people underestimate him. When asked about the Schiff hearing, he always said the same thing. I just asked questions. I took his own words and asked him to explain them. That's all any of us can do. Ask questions, demand answers, and let the truth speak for itself. He would pause, then add, some people did something. They told the American people things that weren't true. They never apologized. And eventually someone asked them about it. Kennedy would smile. I was happy to be that someone. In the years that followed, trust in institutions continued to be debated. Some blamed partisan media. Some blamed social media. Some blamed politicians who put party over truth. But those who had watched the Kennedy Schiff hearing knew a simpler truth. Trust is destroyed when leaders lie and refuse to admit it, when powerful people make claims they can't support, when certainty replaces evidence, when narrative trumps facts. Adam Schiff had spent years presenting himself as a defender of democracy, a truth-teller standing against lies. And in one afternoon, in one hearing room, all of that had been stripped away. Not because of partisan attacks, not because of unfair questions, but because someone had finally done what should have been done years earlier. Taken his words, compared them to the evidence, and asked him to explain. The truth had been there all along, in the Mueller report, in the transcripts, in the Inspector General's findings. It just needed someone to ask about it. Some people did something. They asked questions, and the truth set everyone free.